Okay, so Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I know I've welcomed myself, but just so everyone knows, my name is Hiba and I am a senior diabetes dietitian. And what I am going to talk to you about is healthy eating in Ramadan. And what I would like to do is have a bit of a focus on diabetes as I go along. So I'm going to talk about general healthy eating principles, but then I will highlight where things might be different for diabetics. And what they can do to take charge as well, because I know even if a lot of us aren't suffering from diabetes ourselves, being from ethnic minority groups, we all know someone or are related to someone who does have diabetes. So it's important that we know what they can have and obviously cater for their needs as well accordingly. Right. Now, so the first thing I want to do I just want to confirm, are you seeing a picture of me on the side? Can you see me talking? As in, it's not covering my screen. I just want to make sure it's not covering the text.
No, we can see both yourself and the text.
Perfect, as long as it's not covering the text. Okay, so the things I want to cover and talk about is, in Ramadan, what are the key issues? The issues are we're limited to the amount of time we're eating. We've got this really extended period of fasting. And in that period, we don't want to make sure we've eaten something that will keep us going and it will keep us full. It's healthy. It meets all our nutritional needs. So making sure that, you know, our vitamin, mineral, calorie, all our nutritional needs are being met, that we're not going to get dehydrated. And on top of that, if you're suffering from diabetes, we want to make sure that your diabetes are being managed appropriately as well. So that's a lot to take in and a lot to I guess make sure all these needs are being met in Ramadan. Now, what I actually want to do is take you away from these ideas of that you come across a lot of articles and documents and videos on the internet saying, okay, we should start having green smoothies and we should have a quinoa for breakfast. And the thing is, these diets, they all sound really fancy, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to meet all these needs that I just discussed. In fact, the last thing you want to do is sometimes have really, really fancy, meals. No one wants to wake up in the morning and make like a crazy green smoothie. What I'm here to do is to tell you how you can adjust your traditional diets and how we can make them healthy. And also, I'm not here to give you a specific meal plan because A, people struggle to follow meal plans, but B, people have different preferences, different cultural needs. That need to be met, and therefore I'm going to teach you, hopefully by the end of this session, on how we can adapt the foods you are eating and how we can make sure that we can optimize them and make them the best to keep us going through the long days of Ramadan. So the first thing is suhoor. So suhoor meaning the morning meal. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has told us to eat suhoor, for there is a blessing in suhoor. Now, in the shorter fast, sometimes people tend not to wake up and just skip the meal. Now, it's crucial we are not missing this meal for a number of reasons. Obviously, you're going a long period of time without eating, so your body needs fuel to function. Make sure we're thinking right, we're eating right, and we can get through the day. B, we want to make sure we're not going to get dehydrated. And C, if you're diabetic, we can have serious impacts by not having an appropriate meal in the morning. So just on a side note, if you are diabetic, what we would say is to wait to eat sahur as late as possible, so as close to the starting of the fast, and also that's the sort of time you'll be taking your diabetes medication as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just briefly look at this Eat Well guide. Now, I'm sure everyone's come across this. It's something that is posted everywhere regarding healthy eating. Now, what it shows the breakdown of what your diet should look like. And there's three main categories that we like to focus on. The yellow one being the carbohydrates. And these will be things like your potatoes, your bread, your cereals, your couscous, your cassavas, plantain, all of that would come under your carbohydrate. I'm going to go and define the details about each of these groups shortly, and the benefits. The second one is your fruit and vegetables, which doesn't need any explaining. But as we know, that there is the recommendation of 5 fruit and vegetables a day. And then you've got your groups, the pink sort of group, which is your proteins. Now, proteins would be, for meat eaters, it would be your fish, your red meats, your chicken, your eggs, and if people are vegetarian, then that will be your beans and lentils and pulses. Then obviously you've got your blue group, which is the dairy, so your cheese, your milk, your yogurts. And then on the side you can see in the bottom left is things we should eat less of and not as often, which are your sugary treats and your high calorie snacks like your crisps and your chocolates. We will discuss everything more in details as we go further down the presentation, but I just wanted you to have that picture in mind as we work through this. So the first thing I want to touch is your carbohydrates. So everyone's meal should be based around carbohydrates. Now, in terms of a norm, so when we consume carbohydrates, they're broken down into our body as glucose. And glucose is the main fuel for our body. It's what keeps our body running. So in a normal fasting person, after about 12 hours on average, so for the first 12 hours, your body runs on your glucose. And after that, that's when you start breaking down the fats. So it's really important that we have a source of carbohydrates in our blood and in our body when we start fasting. This is a little bit different for diabetics, how this works, and I will discuss it further towards the end when we're looking at some specific advice for diabetics. But generally, your meal, the center of your meal, the focus should be your starchy carbohydrates. So this will be your breads, your cereals, your rice, your chapatis, and your naan bread. But when it comes to carbohydrates, so when we're talking about a non-diabetic, we're saying it would be roughly a third of your plate. And when we're speaking about diabetics, it's normally a quarter of your plate. We're going to get some visuals as we go through the next few slides. Now, with carbohydrates, you've got different quality of carbohydrates. So you can see over here I've written opt for whole grains such as granary breads. Now the reason being is because carbohydrates, different carbohydrates have a different glycemic index. Now glycemic indexes, as I mentioned, when we eat carbohydrates, they turn into glucose. Now that glucose can be released into your blood very quickly. So that's your high GI food. So you can see the red line, or they can they're released a little bit more slower, or they can literally trickle through the blood over a longer period of time. So these are the low GI foods. Now what we want to do is opt for low GI foods, because what it means is instead of giving you this really quick rush of glucose into your blood, so this quick energy release, what we're getting is very slow energy release with low GI foods, meaning it keeps you fuller for longer and sustains your sustains your energy levels for a longer period of time. Now this is really important in diabetics as well, because it means instead of having this really quick rush of glucose in your blood, which actually is the key issue in diabetes, which we want to avoid, it helps trickle the glucose into your blood. So as I was saying, we want to opt for low GI. Now cooking methods does impact your GI. So for example, if you have other foods as part of that meal, for example, proteins and fats, that will impact your GI, the GI of a food as well. And also cooking methods will vary it as well. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because we just need to realize that there's a number, it's multifactorial. There's lots of things going on, but we do want to try and consider the type of GI foods we're having. However, on a side note, that doesn't mean, because I'm having something low GI, I can have more of it. The main important message is still the amount of carbohydrates you have. So, that 1/3 for the healthy, sort of your average individual, and a quarter for your diabetic. So that the portion doesn't change. It just means you're having better quality and it keeps you fuller for longer. So I just wanted to highlight a few low GI foods and a few medium GI foods. What you'll find actually throughout the presentation, I'm going to use a generic sort of Western term to describe the foods, because a lot of these foods exist in different cultures, cultural foods, but they just have varying names. So for example, your low GI food is barley. The Prophet Muhammad was quite well known for having barley, so a lot of people could have that in their soup. If we're choosing for just trying to decide which sort of potatoes we want, sweet potatoes have a lower GI than your your sort of standard potatoes. As also couscous for sorry, no, couscous comes in medium. Excuse that for a moment. Also, as I mentioned earlier, your seeded bread. The fact, so I know a lot of people say, oh, should I have white bread or brown bread? Actually, there's not a significant difference between the two. What you want to do is go for seeded bread. The seeds in the bread itself acts as a factor for making it low GI, but also the seeds have really healthy oils and fats in them, which delays the carbohydrate release into your blood. And also the seeded bread has a number of really great vitamins and minerals in there that are great for you for during the day. Now, I guess the fanciest of foods I'm going to recommend is porridge. Now, porridge really is a miracle food when it comes to A, managing your diabetes, but B, when it comes to GI. It literally sits in your stomach like a brick, and it just stays there for quite a few hours and then trickles the energy into your bloodstream. And also, they're really good for your cardiac health as well. Now, porridge can be really boring. I've had people who go, we just can't stomach it, it's disgusting. And then you kind of ask them, have you added anything to it to make it nice? No, we don't know we could do that. So for example, if you're diabetic, you could add some cinnamon in there for flavor. Berries, for example, are really low in glucose, so you could add a handful of berries over it. If you're not diabetic, then what you could do, you could also add, so for example, some mixed fruits on it with a little bit of honey. Or some people like to put hazelnuts over their porridge as well. So make it really interesting. I don't expect anyone to have plain porridge. Next, we're then going to discuss medium GI. So when it comes to medium GI, we're talking about things like basmati rice instead of the other sort of jasmine rice. Couscous, for example, your chapatis and your pizzas, they all come under medium GI. And then you've got your high GI foods, which we want to try and limit, which is your white breads, your really thick naan breads that you get, and also your sugary drinks, things, they will come under high GI. So again, it's thinking about the quality of carbohydrates we're having in our diet. The next thing I want to just also, when I'm speaking about carbohydrates, you really want to, if you're getting pre-prepared foods, for example, the breads from the shops, or cooking it yourself, just make sure you look at the salt content and not adding too much salt, because actually the salt will stimulate thirst, and that's the last thing you want on these really long fasting days. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is proteins. Now, we want to increase the consumption of protein-based foods. So, for example, in sahur, this could be your eggs, your beans, your chickpeas, and lentils. So, for example, fool is quite a common dish to have in sort of the Arab cultures. Now, protein is great for satiety. Studies have shown that eating protein keeps you fuller for longer. Also, proteins play a role in every single cell of your body. It plays a role in growth and function. But numerous roles, but it's crucial. In terms of diabetics, your blood glucose is not actually impacted by proteins. So actually what a lot of diabetics do is they bulk up their plate in proteins in order to keep them full, because they're not able to have as many carbohydrates. They think, right, okay, let me have a bit more protein to make up for that. Now, when it comes to, for example, cooking your eggs, obviously, we got to make sure it is a healthy method. So try and boiling when you can, or poaching, or using limited amounts of oils. And the other thing we want to, people might ask is, well, how many eggs can I have a week? Now, there was this huge issue, but in the media a few years back saying, actually, eggs are really, really bad for you. We can't have eggs at all. Actually, it's not necessarily the case. There's nothing wrong with having eggs in your weekly diet, but I would say, look, aim for 3 days a week and maximum, and don't have eggs 7 days a week. A lot of it is common sense. Everything, when Muslims, we believe that everything should be in moderation. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is just a few miscellaneous areas. So, for example, your fruit and vegetables. Now, the reason we want to be making sure we have fruit and vegetable is A, because vegetables really help bulk up our plate, and but they don't affect your diabetic control, so they won't affect your diabetes control. B, they're really high in your vitamins and minerals. We all know that fruit contributes to your vitamin and mineral intake, and we know that there is the 5-a-day fruit and vegetable recommendation. Sorry, excuse the noise in the background. So the reason there is that recommendation for five a day fruit and vegetables is A, because the nutrients that they give you, but also we know that having 5 fruit and vegetables a day reduces the impacts of a lot of cancers. But that doesn't, but it's really important, the form of that fruit and vegetable is really important as well. So for example, it doesn't mean we have 5 glasses of fruit juice a day. A, because that's not great for your diabetes control, and I will touch on that in a minute. But B, because a lot of the cancer preventing impacts of it has to do with the fact that there is fiber in whole fruits. So if you start blending and making smoothies out of these fruits, what you do is you break that fiber down, so you lose that beneficial impact of it. So so a third of our plates should be the fruit and vegetables, what we should, what that includes is also, for example, your dried fruits and your frozen fruits. Now, just as a side note, for diabetics, we don't encourage dried fruit because they are so high in glucose. But also, like I was saying earlier, for diabetics, we say to avoid fruit juice because it gives you this rush of glucose into your bloodstream, which you really want to avoid. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is nuts. So nuts are really good for satiety. Because of the makeup of them, a small portion makes us full. So you're less likely to have like loads and loads of nuts, for example. A handful normally keeps you full. B, they help keeping you, as I was saying, they keep you full for longer. They've got great, they've got what we call unsaturated fats in them, which are really good for your blood cholesterol. And then the third thing I want to pick up on is dairy. Now, the reason we recommend dairy is A, because it plays a role in, I've lost my chain of thought. Sorry, dairy, yeah. So dairy is really important because it's got calcium in it, and calcium is, again, needed for maintaining the health of our bones. But also, dairy is really important because, for example, 1 glass of milk will give you high quality proteins, potassium, phosphate, iodine, B12. So they're loaded with really good nutrients in them. And also studies have shown that milk contains these really high quality proteins that keep us a lot fuller for longer. So it's a really good drink to have. And I always say, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ went to the heavens and he was given the option of drinking the milk or the wine, and he drank the milk. And I always say, it highlights how good milk is. Now, if you are, what we do say is, unless you're worried about weight loss, we would say to go for the low-fat options, the semi-skimmed options. In a day, you want about 3 portions of dairy, so that would include, for example, a glass of milk, a matchbox portion of cheese, and a pot of yogurt. So opt for the low-fat versions where you can. When it comes to, for example, diabetics, what I would say is to avoid sort of your sugary yogurts or your shop bought yogurts. What you can do is just get, for example, Greek yogurt at home and put, for example, people like to put nuts and fruits and various things on it to make it flavoursome. The next thing I want to point out is, and now we're just going to go through a few specific examples. Now, these are actually examples I've taken from the Diabetes and Ramadan International Alliance website. And what I want everyone to know, these actually are very specific to diabetics, these pictures. And when I say very specific, I mean in terms of the carbohydrate content. So actually, if you're non-diabetic, you can have more carbohydrates in your diet if you wanted to. So for example, this is quite a traditional sort of Arab breakfast that a lot of people would have, sort of a chickpeas based a main, and they would normally have that, for example, with the naan bread. Now, if you look at the picture of the naan bread, it's actually not huge, it's one of those smaller ones. And then in order to bulk up their meal, what you can see is they've added 2 eggs, which are boiled, so they're cooked in a healthy way. They've added olives, which are great because they've got unsaturated fats in them, which they will keep you fuller for longer, and they're great for your cholesterol. They've got a yogurt on the side. They've got a portion of cheese, which is quite common to have as a breakfast, and the yogurt they've got loaded with vegetables. So you can see, if someone was to eat that, they would actually be quite full. If a diabetic ate that, they would feel, that they've eaten enough. But you can see that the main plate here is not based around a huge carbohydrate portion. It's focusing more on the proteins and the dairy. So as I said, if you're non-diabetic, you can have, for example, a little bit more carbohydrates. You could add another naan in there if you wanted. Now, for example, people often have egg for breakfast. So here we've got a picture of a scrambled egg. So you can make the egg how you want. You know, people like to add a bit of cheese on it for calcium. You could add vegetables in it to add flavor with it. So again, for a diabetic, we would say 3, and these are your small seeded toasts, not your large ones. So you've got toast in there, and you've got a glass of water, and you have another picture, which is, again, you know, a lot of diabetics will be saying, hold on, I didn't know I could have the fruit. So for example, the carbohydrate that we've got here, the carbohydrate is in the form of bread, but the fruit that you've got is actually very low in glucose as well. So again, you can just see here that the diet is not as restricted as we think. And actually, we can have our normal breakfast foods. It's just how we have those foods together. The next thing I want to touch on is on iftar. So I think the key message is that, again, in the Quran it says to eat and drink, but do not have it in excess. And I think that's one of the biggest the biggest mistakes we make in Ramadan is eat excessively. Now, studies have shown that with the 2 meals, especially with the long fast, that there is a deficit of normally about 270 calories because we're missing out that meal. But the problem is we make up that deficit by having those really high calorie snacks, treats afterwards. And actually, a lot of people are gaining weight in Ramadan rather than losing weight. Now, a few things I want to just touch on. So, for example, we all like to a lot of us like to break our fast with the dates. Dates are amazing to break our fast with, actually, because they have these really great quality glucose sugars in them. So glucose and fructose. So as soon as you have the dates, you have this quick release of energy in your bloodstream, and that allows you to have time, if anyone needs to, those of you who need to go pray, or finish something off. Having those that source of glucose is great. For diabetics, we say to limit it to 2. Don't have more than 2, because it will give you, it can give you too much of a rise in your blood glucose as well. The other thing that we like to say, for example, having soup is a great option in iftar, because again, it's not very high in carbohydrates for diabetics, but also it gives you a really good source of fluids in your diet as well. Also, we will, as I was saying earlier, the carbohydrates, the same ruling stand for as we were discussing at breakfast in terms of your portions. But obviously, you'll have different types of carbohydrates. You're more likely to have your potatoes and your couscous and your plantain, and it's just a different type of carbohydrates you'll be having in your dinner. And the next thing I want to just focus on, for example, for now, is the protein content of your iftar meal, discussing a few specific examples. Now, we are known as, one of the signs of the Western culture is actually there's a lot more meat being introduced into the diet. Now, if you look at the prophetic diet, Prophet Muhammad wasn't eating meat regularly. We are permitted to eat meat. There's nothing wrong with it, but everything is in moderation. So when we're opting for meat, for example, your red meats, you want to limit it to no more than 2 days a week, because they have been shown to have a large red meat intake has been linked to cardiac disease, for example. B, you want to make sure that the meats that we're choosing are the leaner meats, so the fats have been reduced and been taken out. Now, the other thing is try not to have meat-based meals every single day. So yes, you can have chicken one day. So going for example, the lean chicken, which chicken is anyway, sorry. But also having some days where actually you're not having any meat at all. So you go for your beans and your lentils. So for example, your dals and your chickpea curries. The other thing is, when it comes to fish, we say 2 portions of fish a week, and try and go for sustainable fish. And this is normally written on the packets of the fish that you're purchasing. One of those portions should be an oily fish. When it comes to foods like fish and chicken, try to go for healthier cooking options, like grilling when you can. So, for example, grilling the fish, or having grilled, so if you're trying to make a masala fish, put all the flavors of the masala on it, but then grill it instead of frying it. Same thing with the chicken. Try and grill and oven bake when possible, instead of using a lot of oils. So the next thing I wanted to just touch on, seeing as we're there, are fats and oils. So foods that are high in saturated fats should be avoided. For example, cooking with ghee, having samosas and pakoras and your knafas and the list can go on. And I know people look forward to Ramadan because they're looking forward to these foods that they only have once a year, sort of thing. But the thing is, once that 1 year, 1 month period is 30 days, that's a significant portion of the year. And also we've got the celebration of Eid at the end of it too. I guess enjoy yourself and let loose a little bit. And so when it comes to opting for these foods, if you look at this picture, these samosas are actually baked. So it is possible, people can do it. Try air frying when possible. If you really must fry, try shallow frying. And as I was saying, you try and grill and bake where possible. For example, for these samosas, if you want to make your samosas healthier, instead of going for the shop bought ones, make them at home using filo pastry, and that can be baked. For example, if you are going to defrost foods, instead of putting them into hot oil, if you put cold foods into hot oil, they take a lot longer to fry and absorb more fat. So actually warming them up in the micro or defrosting them before, so they don't need as much time in the oil. Where possible. In terms of what oils you should cook with, now what we have to remember is there are some oils that are superior over others in terms of the impact on our health. However, when you cook something at very, very high temperature, what happens is you denature the product. So what happens is it loses its initial properties. So whilst we say it's best to cook with olive oil, canola oil, and rice bran oil, and they can be cooked at slightly higher and other oils, if you're cooking it at really high temperature, you will lose that beneficial properties. And this is again why we're saying to try and opt for other cooking methods. Now, there are some really good fats, and these are unsaturated fats. As I mentioned earlier, they can be found in your nuts. They can be found in olive oil. So this means adding olive oil to your salads and your foods cold. It's for some cultures, it's traditional to dip, for example, naan bread into some olive oil. So what I would say is try and opt for these oils, unsaturated fats in your diet where possible. However, you just want to note that they are still high in fats, even though it's a good fats. So if you're worried about gaining weight, that doesn't mean, you need to make sure you're not having tens of avocados every day, for example. Now, this advice also stands for diabetics. In terms of, for example, I just wanted to mention on a side note for diabetics, when it comes to foods like samosas, you want to avoid those that have been filled with potatoes. So for example, quite often people will have samosas with potatoes in them, or pastries with potatoes in them, or they'll have rice with potatoes and meat in them, or curries with potato and meat in them. Now the problem is they'll normally have these with chapati, for example, with roti. So that's a carbohydrate on a carbohydrate, and that really cause your blood glucose levels to spike. So what you want to do, and like I was saying, for diabetics specifically, if you're going to have a curry or a rice with potatoes in it, is, if you're making it for the family, it's sometimes difficult to make a separate meal for yourself. So just take the potatoes out of your plate, because you don't want to have carbohydrates and carbohydrates. Also, if anyone has any questions, by the way, please do feel free to put them in the questions box, so I will try my best to answer them at the end. So a few traditional sort of meals, iftar meals. If you take a look here, again, these pictures are specifically for diabetics. So as non-diabetic, what you can do is increase the carbohydrate if you wanted. But you can see here, it's quite a full-looking meal. You've got your meat in there, you've got your dates, you've got a bowl of soup, so that's your proteins. Your chicken is your protein, and then you've got the plate is fully loaded with a vegetable meal, and then you've got your carbohydrates in its form of a chapati. So one chapati is basically what we would recommend for a diabetic for their meal. So as you can see, I'm not asking anyone to starve themselves, and I am actually recommending your normal foods. It's just how we cook them, which is the key thing. So again, if you look here, you can see that there's you've got the fish, which has been stuffed with rice. You've got the vine leaves, which have been stuffed as well. And then you've got a soup to go with it. You've got yogurt with vegetables. You've got fruit. So you can see that actually these meals are pretty filling. It's just thinking about how I can adapt my meals to make them healthier. Again, here you can see, look, the person's had their rice, the carbohydrate in the form of a rice, but it's a smaller plate. Again, it's about mindful eating. If we have a smaller plate, for example, of the carb, but fill it up, we'll tend to think we've had a lot more food, but actually it's just mind games. And then The next thing I want to talk about is hydration. Now, approximately 60% of our body is made up of water, and dehydration can really impact our performance, our concentration during the day, and it can cause headaches and fatigue. And especially in really hot weather outside, we can have really detrimental impacts on our health in the heat. Now, how can we get, fluids, for example, 2 liters of fluids into our body every day, especially when the time is so limited? So I've got a diagram here, which I've named the 6 points of hydration. There's 6 points in the day where you could try and have fluids to make sure you've met your fluid requirements. So we're saying about 200 ml of glass of water, for example. So what you could do is before, let me just, my screen's, oh, sorry. So, for example, first thing in the morning, before starting your suhoor, before even eating the meal, have 200 mils of water. Have your meal, and at the end of it, have another 200 mils of fluid. And then when it's time to break the fast, have your dates and water first, and then go and pray or whatever you need to do. And then again, just before having your main meal, again, have that fluid, and then eat your main meal. And then obviously after having that main meal. And then what I would say is throughout the evening, try and keep a bottle or a jug near you where you've got this it's filled with about 500 mils of fluid. So it's constantly in your sort of periphery so you can see it. Now, in terms of what equates to fluids, now there's different things. Actually, your smoothies and your fruit juices do contribute to fluids, but as I said earlier, for diabetics, these are something you should avoid, but also these do not count as 5 portions of fruit and vegetables, even if there are five fruits in your smoothie. The other way we could, as I mentioned earlier, is milk. So, it doesn't always have to be water, you can have milk. Having soups, so if you have soup as part of your main meal, that's a portion of fluids. Stews, for example, the curries with a lot of fluids. The other thing is, for example, your tea and coffee, but a lot of people experience withdrawal symptoms in Ramadan because they can't have coffee, obviously for a month. So what we start saying is start weaning yourself off the coffee prior to Ramadan starting. So start now. Now, because of the heat as well, another thing we could do if you're really worried about dehydration is opt for your isotonic sports drinks. Now, these are not your, for example, your Iron Brews and your Red Bulls. Those are not isotonic drinks. Those are energy drinks. I don't recommend them at all. But what we're saying here is these specific sports drink. They are known to help replace losses of fluids very quickly. So they're another option you can have. But again, on a side note, they're not recommended for diabetics because they'll cause their blood glucose levels to spike really high. So that's looking at hydration. Now, I just wanted to now speak specifically to the diabetics out there. Now, it's really important that if you have diabetes and you are on some form of medicine, that you see your doctor at least a month before Ramadan is starting to adjust the medicines you have. If you are specifically on metformin twice a day, for example, that's normally okay just to have that as suhoor and iftar. But anything beyond that, it's important you speak to your doctor. And there's lots of studies that have shown that those who have their medications changed versus that don't have their medication changed, there's a real big difference in the negative events that have, for example, low blood glucose levels or really high blood glucose levels that can occur in Ramadan. So actually, please make sure you speak to your healthcare professional. Trial your fasts before Ramadan to see if you are able to keep them. So, for example, we all know that there is no obligation on the person who is unwell to fast. And if you do your trial fasts and you're finding that you are getting really high blood glucose levels or really low blood glucose levels, then speak to your healthcare professional, speak to your local imam, and there is the option of skipping those fasts if you need to. But use this month as a trial period. There's lots of, there are hadiths to say fasting in the month of Shaban is rewarded as well. For those of you who have been given blood glucose meters, it's important to test your blood glucose regularly during fasting periods. So if you're not feeling well, you can test your blood glucose levels. If someone, I know a lot of people say, but we haven't been given a meter by our doctor, it probably means you don't need it. So feel free to speak to your healthcare provider about it. But for those of you who do have the meter test regularly, testing your blood glucose level, that finger prick test where you take the blood out, does not constitute to breaking the fast. Now, in terms of, as I was mentioning earlier, for your non-diabetics, after about 12 hours of using glucose in our body, we then go into using fats. Now, the problem in a diabetic is after your body starts finishing using the glucose, there's a real higher risk of diabetics getting hypoglycemia. So this is when their blood glucose level drops really low, and it's quite common in people with medication and insulin. It's really important, if this happens, you speak to your healthcare provider. Now, just a little bit of a visual. Now, for a non-diabetic, what happens is you will see that after about an hour of having your meal, you get this spike in. So when we say blood sugars, the actual term is blood glucose. So the glucose level in your blood spikes. You can see that's significantly lower than a diabetic. This blood glucose level spikes really high after having a meal. Now, the reason I am showing this is because coming on to, you can see they've got a higher rise in blood glucose level, and it stays there longer. Now, if these levels rise more than we want to an unhealthy level, what happens is you're getting this silent damage happening inside your body. Now, it's really important because my diabetes doesn't impact you, if you get a cold or a headache, you feel it. Diabetes is very slow, and it damages your body and the inside very, very slowly. And sometimes you only see the damage when it's gone too far. And so I think this visual is really important to show how blood glucose is in a diabetic. The reason I want to highlight this is because when it comes to snacks, for example, for diabetics, what you want to do is, just going back to the slide, is you want to, before having a snack, so this is post-iftar, by the way, you want to wait long enough to give your body time to clear out that high level of glucose. Yeah. So when you're about 2.5 hours, you can start seeing your body is now on the decline. Your glucose level is now on the decline, and that's when you can start thinking about having a snack. The problem is, if you have it too early, you've already got this high glucose level, and what you've done is you've topped it up with another level, with snack. And if it's carbohydrate based, you cause your blood glucose levels to go quite high. So when it comes to snacks for a diabetic, if you look at this this platter, there's very little carbohydrates in there. It's actually based on proteins, your dairy, as well. So if you look, you've got meats, you've got olives, you've got cheese, you've got nuts. So again, when it comes to having snacks, you have to think about, right, if I'm having a carbohydrate snack, it has to be less than 15 grams of carbohydrates. So for example, that would be a small pot of yogurt, but that's the non-chopped one, sorry. The other thing you would do is try and, for example, if you're having carbohydrates, so for example, you could do is have some breadsticks, a couple of crackers, but you could then throw in or half an naan, and what you could do is dip that in, for example, your hummus, you've got your aubergine dips. So your snacks don't have to be boring. When it comes to fruits, we would say a portion would be what fits in your hand. So as a diabetic, you can have a portion of fruit as a snack. What we would say is not to have, in the day, you can have 2 to 3 portions maximum, but that doesn't mean you can have them together. So for example, a portion is what fits in your hand. So that could be a handful of berries and an apple, but having those together will cause your blood glucose levels to spike. So you can have it as a snack, and then maybe an hour and a half later, you can have your next portion of fruit as a snack. Vegetables will not cause your blood glucose to spike, so you can have those as and when you wish. Sorry. Now, this is really important. As a diabetic, if your blood glucose levels fall below 3 millimoles, 3.5 millimoles, or goes above 16.7 millimoles, you must break your fast and speak to your healthcare professional provider to say this has happened. Now, a low blood glucose level is what we call hypoglycemia. Now, you're more at risk of this if you're having insulin and certain medication. Now, the common symptoms, which I feel is really important to discuss, and those of you who have family members who have diabetics, it's really important to notice these symptoms. They might not realize they're experiencing them because it does affect their ability to think at the time. So they're shaking and sweating. They start getting blurred vision, tingling lips. They become really irritable and anxious, actually, and experiencing palpitations. So like I said, a lot of the time they don't realize this is happening. So you sometimes have to highlight, I think you might be having a hypo. Check it out, please. Now, if you're having a hypo event, what you want to do is you want to treat it. And for example, to treat it, it could be a small can of your sugary fizzy drink. So, you get the small cans of Sprite or Fanta. You have those, or a 150 ml glass of, for example, orange juice. And these are not the sugar-free ones. You want the ones with sugar in them. You have those, and after about 10-15 minutes, you then follow it up with a snack. It could be like a slice of toast. It has to be a carbohydrate-based snack. It could be a slice of toast. It could be a couple of crackers. And the reason it has to be a plain carbohydrate-based snack, because the thing is, if, for example, I've heard people say, yeah, I had a chocolate Snickers. The problem is the Snickers has a lot of other ingredients in it to slow down that the effect of that glucose level reaching the levels it needs to. So it's really important that you have either glucose tablets at home. So that's 3 glucose tablets you take in one sitting, or the snacks that I've just discussed. Hyperglycemia is when the blood glucose levels go really high. Signs of this is thirst. You're going to the toilet more often, you're getting headaches and itchiness, and you're producing ketones. So this means your body is now starting to break down the fats. And these are mainly with people with type 1 diabetes, or occasionally type 2. Commonly with type 2, it's those who are on insulin. And a common way of telling if you are producing ketones is they have a clear drop smell coming from their breath. So that's just a few key points I feel like as diabetics need to be remembered. So in summary, it's important to continue having a balanced diet in Ramadan, and it should be based around starchy carbohydrates, proteins, fruit, vegetables, and dairy. So we want to make sure we've got a variety to make sure we're meeting all our nutritional needs. On a side point there, I would recommend getting an over-the-counter multivitamin. Again, because the day's hours are restricted, we can't often eat as much or what we want to eat. So getting an over-the-counter multivitamin and making sure there's vitamin D in it as well. So the next thing is the quantity is crucial. For example, the quantity of carbohydrates, but the quality does play an important role. So for example, your low GI foods, and also, for example, your proteins, to make sure they're lean meats. The other thing is to remember is to opt for the healthier cooking methods. Just an aside note, there's nothing wrong with occasionally having your kanafas and your baklavas and your treats, but we need to remember they are a treat. We don't need to have a dessert after every meal, and if you really fancy it, have, for example, something based around fruits, so at least you're getting some benefits in there as well. For example, your milky desserts, like for example homemade custard with less sugar in it than you would normally put in, yogurts or homemade flapjack, rather than having the really high calorie ones. But like I said, we don't have to have a dessert every day. It's just a mindset, and I think that's really important as well for us to remember. And especially for diabetics, I would say to cut out desserts completely. And if you really must have a dessert, wait for about an hour and a half afterwards, and then opt for the healthy desserts, which I just mentioned, in a smaller portion. It's really important to keep hydrated, and I think we sometimes overlook that. Diabetics, please speak to your healthcare provider if you are on any medications, especially, and try fast leading up to Ramadan. And please be aware, make sure your family is aware of the signs of a hypo or a hyperglycemic event. And it's okay to break your fast at that point, because actually letting our body suffer is actually the opposite of what Allah wants us to do. So if you are suffering or you're not unwell, then actually it's sunnah not to fast. And that's it. So thank you for taking the time out to listen to me. We'll now hopefully open the floor for any questions that you have. Khadija, could you highlight any questions, or just read out any questions to me that were in the chat? And if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to add in as I answer the ones that are already there. Thank you. And
I'll read. Sorry, I think your voice is gone slightly lower. It's sorry, say that again.
Hear me now?
Kind of.
Okay, I'm trying to see what I can do. I hold this up here.
Yeah, it's kind of breaking up.
If I hold it up here, is that better?
Yeah, slightly better.
I'm literally holding the camera on top of it, in front of me.
Okay.
So
yeah.
If there's any questions, yep, go ahead.
Someone's asking for advice about breastfeeding diet during Ramadan.
So they want to. So there, if you are breastfeeding, if it's a very very young baby, it's not obviously an obligation for you to fast because you will find that you start feeling really dehydrated. But if you find that you are able to fast, I'm not saying not to fast. But in terms of your diet, it would be very similar. There's no sort of special diet in order for someone who is breastfeeding. Just make sure you are keeping your fluid. Make sure you're having maximum fluid when you can. But apart from that, there isn't any specifics that I would recommend.
And someone's asking, is the seeded bread usually high in sugar?
So again, what we were saying about when we talk about sugar, what we normally refer to is glucose. Now, no, the answer would be in short, no, because even if they have a little bit more carbohydrates in them, it's counteracted by the fact that you've got seeds in them, and that will slow down the release of the glucose. So, so the short answer would be no, it's fine to have.
Also, someone said that you froze during the carbohydrates bit, so could you just kind of give a summary?
For iftar, or are we talking about for suhoor? Or are we talking about GI? Sorry, would they be able to just summarize that, and then I can just highlight that specific one.
Right, are vegetable dates higher in sugar than others?
Honest answer is I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head. I think it just depends on the size of the dates, and the vegetable dates do tend to be bigger. But again, for a non-diabetic, I don't think it makes a huge difference which dates you're going for. As a diabetic, if you are having the vegetable dates, which are bigger, so based on that, they are likely to have more carbohydrates. It's the size which would affect.
Right. Jazakallah khair, Jazakallah.
Oh, yeah.
Another question, is olive oil or coconut oil better to fry samosas in?
So olive oil, I think coconut oil, there's this big thing about it in the media about it being like the superfood, and that's come actually a lot from this this idea of the vegan diet. But the problem with coconut oil is actually it's quite high in saturated fats. So actually olive oil is better, but like I was saying, we just need to make sure that to avoid deep frying and cooking at a really high temperature. I hope that answers that question.
And the one about the carbohydrates before the GI slide.
Hold on, I'm going to have to go back to that because my memory is a little bit. Carbohydrate slide. So yeah, I'll just briefly touch on that again. So carbohydrates, so we want to aim for our meal to be based around starchy carbohydrates. So that would be, as I was mentioning, your breads, your cereals, your rice, your veggies. And what we were saying here is for a diabetic, we're talking about a quarter of the plate. So one way of measuring it is saying this size portion. And for a non-diabetic, we would say about a third of your plate should be your carbohydrates. And then from there, we spoke about it's now looking at the quality of the carbohydrates and looking at getting in the low GI carbohydrates. That was pretty much what was covered in that. That having brown bread over white bread isn't significantly different. It's when you start bringing in seeded breads, that's where it makes a difference.
Sorry, Hiba.
Of course.
I think the Wi-Fi again, or we can't really hear you properly.
Sorry, I think it's just what I was leaning the laptop on. Did you hear that?
Could you just repeat the last bit again, please?
I was saying when it comes to, for example, your white bread versus your brown bread, that's not where the difference is. The difference lies in when you start bringing the seeded breads in. So yeah, that was what I was saying.
Oh, thank you so much. Another question, do you have any suggestions for stopping sugar cravings?
This is really interesting. I was looking at a lot of research recently around this idea of sugar craving. Now that's actually it's related to the Western diet, and you find that in different countries they don't actually get these sugar cravings. What it is, it's hormones, and there's a number of factors that gives you that craving of hunger, and we automatically see it as sugar cravings. Sorry, repeat the question again because I just lost my chain of thought.
Right. Do you have any suggestions for stopping sugar cravings?
So yeah, so as I was saying, yeah, that was just sort of a side note. but I guess one thing Ramadan teaches us, can you hear me? I've just moved my laptop.
Yeah, much better.
Perfect. So one thing we're saying, I've lost my chain of thought. Sorry, I'm seeing the questions as we come up at the same time. In terms of sugar cravings, in Ramadan, where we're learning self-control, so this is the time to get on top of those sugar cravings. As I was saying, it is a very much, actually, science has shown it's culturally related as well. But if you are getting that sugar craving, like I said, if you're non-diabetic, then there's nothing wrong with you having a treat every now and then. But like I was saying, opt for the healthier snacks, and also things like I was saying, the dates, your fruits, they're all based, they're sort of sugary as well, I guess. If you're diabetic, like I was saying, you wait for that 1.5 hour, 2 hour period, and you can have a small sort of a sweet pot of yogurt. You're having your custard but making it with less sugar. You can have your some dates then as well. So it's not that you must completely cut sugar out of your diet. It's just about how much you're having and when you're having it. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And I think also while you were giving a summary of the carbohydrates section, I think your voice broke up. So someone's asking a normal carb portions.
So for a non-diabetic, 1/3 of your plate. For a diabetic, we say 1/4 of your plate. So we're talking about a fist portion. Now, as a diabetic, if you want numbers, for a snack, we're talking about 15 grams of carbohydrates. And for a main meal, we're talking about 30 grams of carbohydrates. That's just a number. I think people go on visuals more, so the fist size portion for diabetics and 1/3 of a plate for the non-diabetics.
Thank you, Jafar. And I think another question, I think they meant brown bread is better than white bread.
Brown sugar, okay, I think I've answered the brown versus white bread, but I'll answer the brown versus white sugar. There's not a significant difference. When it goes into your body, whether it's brown sugar or white sugar, it will both become glucose in your bloodstream, and there's no difference in the time it takes to become that blood glucose level. There's a small difference in the processing of it, which makes it brown versus white, and actually sometimes the brown sugar is actually brown because food coloring has been added to it. So the key, white sugar. I've just seen the question. So actually the key message is sugar is sugar. And actually honey as well. A lot of diabetics ask me, okay, so instead of sugar, can I have honey? Again, that will have the same impact. Once that honey is in your body, whether that sugar's come from your sort of tablespoon of sugar or it's come from honey, in your body it all becomes glucose. So as a diabetic, you can't replace sugar with honey either. Sorry, that was a side note, but I thought it was important to mention.
Thank you so much, Safar. Okay, I think there's another question here. Can you explain about the latest research coming out on fasting and quality saturated fats are actually good for your overall health? A lot of this information is standard but out of date. Scientists, doctors, nephrologists are recommending fasting quality saturated fats to regulate people's blood glucose levels and helping people with diabetes, metabolic diseases, and even PCOS.
So yeah, there is a lot of research that's now coming out that we're saying that actually some fats are not as bad as we thought. So for example, certain fats in your dairies are not as bad as we initially thought, and that actually they can be beneficial in actually maintaining blood glucose levels in diabetics. This research is still in the earlier stages where there is some quite strong evidence, but it's not enough for us to change our current practices and guidelines. And also on top of that, the issue is if we start now promoting, which we're not, but if we start promoting saturated fats in diabetics, the problem is they start increasing these volumes of saturated fats, which then increases their weight. And that has a bigger impact on all these comorbidities such as diabetes, PCOS, metabolic disease. That weight gain is more likely to impact your diabetes as opposed to introducing the saturated fats. So what I would say is guidelines have not changed on that. There is some evidence up and coming. However, having those saturated fats and increasing them without the right sort of guidance and the study showing how much and in what amount and how it should be done actually can be risky.
Thank you. So There's another question here. Is ketogenic diet recommended for diabetes?
I would say no. Reason being because what we're talking, the ketogenic diet, we're now talking about using the fats. So instead of glucose, we're now increasing, reducing the carbohydrates in our diet and bringing in fats in order to avoid that breakdown of carbohydrates. Now, it is the key message actually is, as a diabetic, you do not want to cut out all carbs for your body. Your body does need carbohydrates as the main fuel, as we were saying, for example, the first 12 hours of fasting. Your brain has a certain, I think it's 130 grams, if I recall correctly, of carbohydrates it needs to function. So cutting out all carbohydrates from your diet, or very reducing it to a very small amount, actually can be really dangerous, especially for diabetics on certain medications. So no, I would say we don't need to follow the ketogenic diet as a diabetic. It's just portion control. You can have carbohydrates, it's just controlling how much you're having and when you're having it. And I guess the other key thing is ketogenic diet, people might follow it for a short period of time, but what happens after, let's say 2-3 months following that diet, you then go back onto your normal diet, and your blood glucose levels go up again. So we need to work on having sustainable ways of changing our diet that are more manageable long term and can be continued long term. So I hope that answers the question about the ketogenic diet.
Thank you. I think there's another one also to do with ketogenic for breastfeeding. 10-month baby.
Sorry,
solids.
could you, are we talking about the mother following a ketogenic diet or the child? I mean, I guess I could still answer that actually, because at 10 months old, if for whatever reason someone does, the mother. Okay, so if for whatever reason, I'm not promoting the ketogenic diet here, but if for whatever reason a mother has decided to go down the route of ketogenic diet, it shouldn't really impact the child, because by 10 months, the child should be having regular solids. The breast milk shouldn't really be impacted by it. Unless you're going really extremes whereby you stop or your breast milk production reduces, but actually the baby should be getting what it needs from the diet anyway, from the foods that they're having themselves anyway. By about 10 months, so six months for introducing food, by about 10 months the child should be working towards establishing 3 meals anyway. So short answer would be no, as long as your baby is eating well.
Thank you. I think there's no more questions.
Yeah. There's something about sorry. There was a question, but I've lost it, about toxic foods or something.
I think
I can't. Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah, many of the processed toxic oils and carbs and high carbs and sugar that creates a lot of health problems. So that one.
Yeah, I mean, again, those are the sort of foods we don't recommend anyway. I mean, we're talking about things, palm oils are in a lot of snacks, for example, cakes and biscuits that are shop bought, and they're really detrimental to the health. So foods which do have high levels of saturated fats are normally your cakes and your biscuits and your sugary treats, which actually we say to keep to a minimum anyway, and we don't really recommend you having those too often, which is why they're not included on the plate. They were on the side as a occasional treat. So yeah, I agree with that point.
Okay, I think that's all.
I think there's one question I learned recently, that carbs should also be adjusted to our hormonal types. It would be very difficult for anyone to work out what their hormonal types are. I know a lot of people will sell you this idea of, we can give you a blood test, we can work out what hormone types you have, and according to that adjust your carbohydrates. I mean, you will be sold that, and we don't promote that sort of those sort of techniques. At the end of the day, like I said, it's portions of carbohydrates, and then from the portion is then going for the good quality carbohydrates. So beyond that, you can't change your carb significantly beyond that anyway. So
I wouldn't promote this idea of this hormonal therapy, and you'll find a lot of these fad diets and these people promoting these sort of things out there. But the key message actually is just to have a balanced diet, and I think the sunnah is that we must balance everything, and diet is no different. We should avoid excessiveness in everything, whether it's carbs or proteins, or yes, I'm saying reduce your carbs as a diabetic, but that doesn't mean we go crazy on everything else we eat. It's all about moderation. Yeah, sister saying she did like a test online and it's quite easy. It's sort of about balancing portions, which is exactly what I'm saying. It's just about balancing portions. If you're trying to lose weight, then you reduce your carbohydrates, for example. It's balance. It is nothing about some specific magic that can be done. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, and I think that is all of the questions as well.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. That was so beneficial. And I think like really something that's needed with Ramadan coming up.
I mean, there's a question out there for repeating this closer to Ramadan. We will have Khadija, you're part of the organization, so you can speak to your team if you feel that would be beneficial. But also from me, Jazakallah khair for taking the time out to listen to me. Sorry, for any ramblings or if something didn't get answered. But I hope you've all learned some key lessons as well. So thank you so much. And Jazakallah khair for the comments as well and the feedback.
That's okay. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Thanks.